What's up, everybody? It's Friday. Let's talk about some data. Today we have Nick Schrock, Scott Breitenother. So let's kick things off. What's up, everybody?
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Anytime. So yeah, I think this chat came about. We were I don't know exactly. I think we're talking about a bunch of stuff happened around bundling over the past few weeks. So
a little bit of stuff about bundling. I've heard it mentioned
about this. Yeah.
Did someone say bundling at some point?
The data stack was unbundled for 36 hours, but we're back.
We're back. It's been bundled again.
Fundle bundle. I guess for people who aren't in the know on what we're talking about, Nick, do you want to maybe introduce the topic?
Sure, I'll go for it. So I'll just do it in the order of the content that was produced. So I believe it was the founder of a company called what is it? FAL.ai, Gorkum. He published a piece called "The Unbundling of Airflow," where he described all the emergence of these kind of more domain-specific tools, and he framed it as this unbundling. That Airflow is being unbundled. What was previously 100 tasks in Airflow is now 100 dbt models. What was before like 50 ingest jobs in Airflow is now like a single node that talks to Fivetran or Airbyte or something like that. So it kind of and that phenomenon was explained as unbundling. I would have framed it a little differently, of more like the DAG is almost being pushed down into constituent tools and being federated across those things, because each one of those tools has its own baby orchestrator in it. Like I haven't done it, but if you grep the dbt code base, there's probably a topological sort somewhere in there that's like taking the DAG of dbt models and then running a SQL command per one. So there's some notion of orchestration within each of those things, and this is kind of a phase shift in tooling like that. Airflow still would exist in those worlds, but it just becomes much more of a coarse-grained tool. But I saw this, and it was very well timed for a new release that we were going to do around a new concept called software-defined assets. And it was really actually what he was saying was really in line with a lot of what we were thinking internally on the Dagster team, because we didn't phrase it as unbundling, but we saw that like so much knowledge was being pushed down into these constituent tools. And there was and they all kind of were much more asset oriented than task oriented. And we had the opportunity to kind of like, in a first class way, take all that knowledge embedded in all those tools and resurface it in a single operational plane. And so I took the opportunity to frame that as rebundling the data platform, because I thought the conversation was timely.
Very well played.
Thank you. But no, we wouldn't have used the term rebundle without that post. But the thrust of the content was exactly the same, where we felt the need that as kind of the logic of all these DAGs being pushed down these constituent tools, it actually reduced observability and understanding, and there's really no cohesive surface to understand what's happening in your data systems. And that's the kind of where the rebundling the data platform post came from, which effectively describes the software-defined asset system.
Not all at once now.
And I mean, this totally resonates with me, to be honest. I found the article very intriguing, Gorkum's article, but I also felt like it didn't answer the question of how you could like try to discard Airflow. A lot of what he was talking about, to be quite frank, I've been using Airflow since 2016 or 2017. In the original conception of Airflow would kind of be considered abusive Airflow, if that makes any sense. And it was this dirty secret, like really, and I would always train people, do as little in Airflow as possible. It's a babysitting layer, and that sounds unsexy, but it's actually really, really important. If you've ever had cron jobs go down on Thanksgiving Day, which how many of you have done that on the show? Yeah, and someone calls you to fix it, then you understand why this is important. But I think your idea, Nick, and what you guys are doing with Dagster is phenomenal. Is it fair for me to compare software-defined assets with like what Terraform does or what CloudFormation does, but maybe more data specific, or is that not an apt comparison?
It's definitely in spirit. I would prefer to actually, I think a better name for infrastructure as code is software-defined infrastructure, actually, because it doesn't mean like just like Terraform is one implementation of it. There's like another system called Pulumi, right? Which is actually, you write it in JavaScript actually. And you create representations of software. But yeah, we definitely view ourselves in the lineage of like a bunch of domains of computing have actually really been well served by these more kind of declarative approaches. And then you defer, you declaratively say what you want, and then some centralized system kind of makes that into reality. So like React and similar things like that in the front end space, Terraform, Pulumi in the infrastructure as code space. And we consider that in that lineage of bringing kind of that way and that approach to the space of data platforms and building data assets.
Well, question, I mean, are we limited by the tools that you're kind of orchestrating in this? Like, I think my challenge is if you are essentially orchestrating kind of with Dagster and these latest generation of tools, orchestrating SaaS, private SaaS, public SaaS, self-hosted applications, and your own applications, you have a lot of control. But the minute you go to a Fivetran or a dbt Cloud or Looker, they're open in some ways with their API, but it's not nearly as open. Like, can Dagster fulfill its core mission with the amount of permission it has to kind of get into Fivetran and do something?
I mean, you're right. We're constrained by the underlying APIs that we interact with. But I think like at the most simple level, all of these systems need to be at some level invocable with an API. I don't know how you could get away without it. And what degree of control they allow us in the API kind of it affects like the level of granularity of operational control you have over things. But even in the like simple case where it's like, hey, all you have is an API call and it just materializes some static set of tables, say from like Airbyte or Fivetran. We still think that this programming model really serves it well, because we can, even with that, we still have the 4 nodes we can plug into the global asset lineage graph. And even that's like a huge step function in terms of observability and understandability.
Well, let's say all you could do, just very basic API access, is ask a question, are you done with what you promised to do?
Yeah.
It's scheduled in the console, but just are you done and what's your schema? Those 2 questions. Already there's a lot you can do with that. And having that information solves a lot of problems over just trying to use a cron job when the other system might or might not be done with its task.
But I feel like I'm excited. Yeah, I'm excited about this bundling and unbundling, and it sounds like everybody is pretty much saying the exact same thing, but in a different language, where like everything is getting complex. But I'm kind of excited about like what's next when you have either through some sort of centralized single tool that does all the jobs, or something like Dagster that is so aware of all the tasks. What are the cool things that we can start to do? I mean, like, I feel like there's so much stuff that humans do right now that computers should be doing in the stack. Like, I'm sorry, I'll stop talking.
No. I was getting my camera focused.
I do
have this problem.
But like materialization strategies, like what grain, what system should this be materialized in? CDN, load balancing, like all this kind of stuff, like frequency. I mean, really, truly, if a system knows that I need to support dashboards or this kind of recommendation algorithm downstream, why can't we let something like a Dagster or a Dagster 3000 in a year or 2 decide all the kind of the make all those optimization decisions that humans are doing now? Like, why should I have to decide whether I should materialize my intermediate models or not on dbt, or whether I should have a roll-up table or not? Like, shouldn't humans know the logic? Shouldn't there be a computer that can run 1,000 different scenarios that can decide on the best kind of way to deploy this infrastructure to optimize for my goals? You know what I mean? Like, again, that's the thing that gets me excited about.
Yeah, no, we totally want to push in the direction. Like, our kind of dream is to be able to say like, hey, I need this asset materialized by some policy, right? Like this
Mhm.
needs to be, and you just kind of like set declaratively what the business requirement is. And then the system kind of takes care of scheduling, optimizations, materialization strategies, all that as much as possible.
Yeah.
And, that's, that's like really, I think, one of the directions we can go with this thing, which is really exciting.
Yeah, just like drop a copy of it in, in ClickHouse or something like that, something that's really snappy for my dashboards, and materialize it before Monday morning, before the reports come in, like all these type of exciting. Like I think that would be very exciting to be able to do that in the future. Like that's what I'm pumped about.
Yeah, for sure.
So work on that.
It's on the roadmap.
Perfect.
It's also
request,
it's on
Scott.
the roadmap.
And some people make their product feature requests on like GitHub issues. I do them on live video. That's you got to go straight to the man in charge.
That's how we roll around here, and we also have wild speculation too every time.
And wild dogs, apparently.
That too, yeah.
Yeah, I can get my dog. My dog's in here.
What kind of dog you got?
A mini golden retriever, actually.
Oh, fun.
What is a mini gold? That is a species I thought only came in one size.
What size do you think that is? Like
60% golden, 20% poodle, 20% cocker.
Ooh.
Anyway.
Cute. Very cute.
Well, Matt, you were saying like you've been writing a bunch about orchestration as well. I was curious about
Let's talk about
where
that.
your-
Let me
where your
bounce
head's
this off
at,
you
yeah.
guys. Yeah. So what I've been thinking lately, and it's not just in the context of data, just up front, but it was driven by just thinking about Airflow and Dagster and data orchestration tools. And that is fundamentally, let's think about what made Linux so successful. Well, you had Linux come out, and it was this very open software ecosystem. Anyone could write software for it, which was not as true with Unix, right? Like Unix, you had all this fragmentation, and you had Unix System 5 licensing and all this stuff. So you had this Unix-like operating system, very open ecosystem, but then Unix provided all these core services that you needed if you were going to write software to get things done. For example, the modern version of this is called systemd. So what does systemd do? Well, Linux has to run a bunch of different services to communicate with networks, to present the display, to do all kinds of things that you want to do in your software, whether it's a server or a desktop operating system. Systemd takes care of all that stuff for you. It turns on different services, it turns them on in the correct order, it manages cron jobs, it manages essentially what you would call orchestration, but in a desktop environment. So what I was thinking about increasingly with data orchestration tools is that what we're really talking about is like an operating system for the cloud. So in other words, instead of managing services on a single box, I'm now managing services across an entire cloud. And so that could mean that I'm managing BigQuery, Fivetran, dbt, Docker, maybe like all kinds of things together. And so I feel like to do that, fundamentally, there are three components that aren't yet unified, but will probably be unified in the future. So first one, at least for me being, a data engineer, is going to be something like Airflow. Data orchestrator manages tasks, that kind of thing. Next one is going to be something like Terraform. So not only are you orchestrating and timing things, but you're standing up services and infrastructure that you need and making sure they're turned on. Third one, I'd probably throw a build system in there too, because I think at some point, not only will you orchestrate these processes, but you'll check for the latest version of the code and you'll run the latest version of the code. So that's going to be a build process in the mix so that every time a data engineer changes the SQL query, it just kind of auto deploys in a common platform. So you're not having to manage this across multiple platforms. So yeah, the discussion around what you guys are doing with Dagster was just music to my ears because it doesn't fully realize that vision of being an operating system in the cloud, but I think we're moving in that direction, basically. Like there seems to be this momentum towards solving these problems that we've had in Unix and traditional operating systems at a higher level.
Yeah, that's super cool. Scott, I actually have a question for you related to that. I guess I'm playing host now. I probably want to take over the whole
That's
conversation.
fine. I'm actually trying to troubleshoot some streaming connections too. We're not working on LinkedIn for whatever reason again. So yeah, continue.
And I'm going to put my mic up on the screen so I have a little bit more authority.
Yeah, you got to show your mic. You can't have it down here.
I don't know.
You got to have it up here. Or
You
here,
probably know better than anyone here how all the data services and SaaS services, they're inching towards having Terraform providers. Like I think dbt Cloud has one now, and maybe Fivetran does. But do you use Terraform in the context of data platform deployment with your clients at all?
It's not there yet.
Not there yet.
It's funny. I feel like so we do a lot of infrastructure as code, but we use kind of Git managed SQL like grant statements and things like that. Because it's like, I guess there's two reasons. I think we found that our clients aren't quite ready for Terraform, and the tools aren't really ready for Terraform. There aren't a lot of folks that are using Terraform to manage cloud data resources yet. I think it's just, I think we're just not there yet, and a lot of the services themselves aren't ready. I think Snowflake and like some of the cloud data warehouses are further along, but Fivetran and dbt Cloud, I don't necessarily feel like using Terraform to manage those is kind of ready for prime time yet.
Interesting.
But I agreed to kind of Matt's point that like I'm excited about this operating system because it does. We have at Brooklyn Data, we have probably 60 clients. They all have at least, let's call it 3 to 4 or 5 cloud data services. I mean, just making sure everything's working, and if it's broken, knowing that when it's broken and rerunning, and and everything is a cron right now. And we do manage things through kind of infrastructure as code using SQL statements, but it's a challenging job to manage this much cloud architecture and cloud resources in the current state. It's just not there yet.
Totally.
And I don't want to push I don't want to push on Terraform on any of our clients yet, because they wouldn't be ready for it either.
I mean, about a couple minutes ago, about a half hour ago, I was talking with somebody who was talking about trying to figure out the orchestration between Azure and AWS. They're using Amazon, managed Airflow there, and they're like, well, now we have to think of how we're going to do that in Azure, and this is really going to suck. And I'm like, yeah, it totally is going to suck for you.
It's hard.
It's really hard.
It really is.
Yeah, it's like, now I got to find a database, and they're probably going to push me to use Synapse, and I really don't want to use that. I'd rather have something that interops between the clouds. I'm like, yeah, it's going to suck for you too. Snowflake's going to work for you, but even that's pretty simple. Just set up this cross account. But yeah, interops, it's really tough.
To your point, like that operating system in the cloud, Matt, you didn't explicitly talk about it being kind of, being cloud interoperable, but I think that's huge too, because I chat with a lot of people that are on multi-cloud, and I wouldn't describe it as like an intentional multi-cloud strategy, where like the probability of each of these clouds going down are 0.001, and by having be on all 3 clouds, you've reduced it. They're actually like every cloud is dependent on the other, and so it's kind of additive on their kind of the risk of going down. And so the ability to manage cloud data infrastructure across clouds is such a pain right now.
It really is. And yeah, a lot of it with multi-cloud is just going to the data. So in other words, people don't intentionally spin up Google maybe, but it turns out the Google Cloud Platform is the best place to manage any kind of Google Media, Google Ads data. It's just integrated with BigQuery. So now you're using that, but you're actually in AWS shops, so you're in AWS, but you've got some obscure services running on Azure because you have some Microsoft stuff around, and pretty soon you're in 3-4 clouds. And yeah, to your point, like there's no central management layer, no central pane of glass to make sure that all those services are up and running. And then the other nightmare that you run into is when you're planning mitigation strategies, how do you actually execute a mitigation strategy? So you go through the simulation. Let's say Azure goes down, or Azure US East 1 goes down. Well, there really aren't great tools to handle that process for you. You can have a playbook for DevOps, but that's about it. And so a lot of what an operating system is supposed to do is manage service failures, for example, and try to mitigate them to some extent.
I think the plan these days is not to create cloud resources in AWS US East 1.
That is very.
I think that's what everybody's decided. It's US East 2 or bust.
Yeah, but it's shockingly common. I see it all the time.
I'm just teasing. I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, totally.
And there's egress fees. That's like cell phone minutes of the 1990s or something. So
I mean, I don't even fully understand egress ingress fees. Like it feels like it's
I don't think you
charged
want
quite
to.
arbitrarily. No, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's something that for large clients, I have to think about a little bit just to make sure there isn't going to be a surprise cell phone minutes bill at the end of the month. But like, it's very unpredictable.
Oh, it totally is. I think it's one of those things where the clouds there's definitely documentation for it. They don't really tell you a lot about this kind of stuff. It's a nice way to make money, especially if you AWS go cross region. It's money there. You go out of the cloud, it's more money, so forth. So,
Even cross zone can get
cross zone, yeah. So I mean that's like the big one. So with interop and stuff, those are the costs that kind of concern me, because even if you get interop working, it's still like that's still going to cost you some money. I'm still betting that at some point one of the clouds is going to drop egress fees, just like cell phone carriers. One of them dropped like
remember nights and weekends, free nights and weekends.
Yeah, it was fun.
That was the thing. I'll call you after 7.
Remember text message charges? Remember that?
Yep.
Like
I knew a guy in college who would always answer his phone telling you if it's daytime minutes or not. It's like, Steve here, it's daytime minutes.
Oh man.
Was that code for like make it short?
Yeah, exactly.
I like this guy.
I feel like I'd get along with Steve. Actually, it's interesting because my thing is not the ingress egress charge. It's like, I don't want shit going over the public internet.
Yeah,
I feel like 50% of the time I try to set up VPC peering, I just give up out of frustration. It's like not worth it, and getting both parties involved and getting the routing tables and everything set up is just a nightmare. I really would love, it's not about the egress ingress fees. It's like, I just don't want things going.
Yeah.
They're 2 of my own services. Why does anything have to go on the public internet to communicate?
And that's where I have to give it to Google. I'll give Google a shout out here. I mean, they're the only cloud provider with basically their own private internet that you can run over. And so I wonder if we're going to see the other cloud providers do that in the future as well. It just seems like it makes sense, right? Just to your point, just having more unified networking, a lot less to worry about.
Mm-hmm. Actually got a question here on YouTube. Oh, by the way, I guess I was going to say if you're listening on LinkedIn, but this is the second time in a row LinkedIn's and the connection between StreamYard and LinkedIn's borked. So they're working on it. But in the meantime,
I think they heard that Matt was just talking about GCP all the time. Matt, talk about Microsoft just a little bit more, and then maybe LinkedIn would work.
No, man. Actually, that's a good point. Thank you.
You need to be more positive on Azure.
Yeah, but thanks everyone who made the move over. But Martin asked, I was wondering, what is your view on all-in-one platforms, basically providing majority of modern data stack pieces, especially the ability of orchestrated and running all pieces at one place? Go for it.
I guess it depends. What do you define as an all-one platform? I think there are some startups who just like kind of like pick, okay, like we're gonna do one of the ingest tools and one of the transform tools and one of the reverse ETL tools, and it's kind of like platform in a box. But I think it's too brittle to like everyone's. The interesting thing about data is that every business is different and has different requirements. And I think that you just need flexibility to pick your own as much as possible. And it kind of depends on what dimension, because you need uniformity on some dimension in order to make sense of things. Actually the Meltano journey is kind of instructive here, because Meltano was an acronym for like a bajillion different technologies, because they were kind of going to provide like a data stack in a box. But it was, some people want some stuff, some people want another, have different requirements. So they had to kind of move on from that approach. I know, Scott, you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think like this is why I have a business. I mean, literally at Brooklyn Data, what we do is we don't build tools anymore. We are architects. We implement tools. We design an architecture, select the right combination of tools for a business, and we configure them through code. And like that's like, and I consider like DBT as like kind of code configuration and things like that. Yep. I've seen a lot of these all-in-ones, and I think for earlier stage companies, it actually can be quite freeing and easy, but I find folks tend to grow out of them because for the exact same reason that you said, Nick, is that it's not like it's not the extreme utopian version that I'd love to see, which is essentially a MDS, modern data stack marketplace, where you pick which ingestion tool, and you pick which warehouse, and you pick the transformation tool, and then it instantly configures it in the cloud and region of your choice. Nothing goes on the public internet, and it just clicks together, and it also has observability and kind of dependency management across the cloud. Like, literally, I'm out of a job when that happens, but I'm happily out of a job. Right now, it's kind of, pick one of each, and that's it. But I think we're going to go towards a place where, I don't know, I would love to see us get to this kind of MDS marketplace, but I don't think we will get there. I think you'll start to see Snowflake, Databricks, these technologies, companies just picking up like the tier 2 or 3 like versions of each of these tools for kind of a combination of stock, equity, transaction, just because they're so valuable that they could drop 20, 30, 50, $100 million in stock on Fivetran's number 5th competitor, and then offer something like that. I think you'll see something like that, but we're going to see some sort of wave of consolidation. I think it's going to start with the smaller players being gobbled up by the giant, big data players. But it's inevitable in every industry that there's going to be some sort of consolidation. It cannot go on like this. You see Matt Turk's diagram, which is phenomenal. And I feel like it probably must take them more and more time every single year. But
he said it's also incomplete.
Yeah.
That's not the full picture, which is scary, actually. There's more data startups than there are like atoms in the universe or something. Like it's crazy.
We're all special, Joe.
We're all special stars and snowflakes. But I wrote about this yesterday in the newsletter, Ternary Data newsletter, by the way. Exclusive stuff there, rants and stuff. But my data rant was just about sort of the pendulum swing between rebundling, bundling, and so forth, not bundling, unbundling, and consolidation on consolidation, right? And so, but the thesis was, what's the next Informatica? Basically, Informatica is still like $1 billion a year revenue company, which is insane, actually. That's about as much as Snowflake makes. So, but that's to me, that's like both the meme and the essence of like extreme bundling, where Informatica does everything. But they're also kind of considered long in the tooth, right? So like, what's next? And my whole thesis was, okay, so to your point, Scott, and Nick, as consolidation starts happening, like who's the next Informatica? Is that basically Snowflake? Does DBT have a marketplace and they become Informatica? I don't know. But it seems like that's going to happen. So, and then all of a sudden that company's like, yeah, that's like old. Let's go on to the next thing. So.
Yeah, I think the operating system analogy is apt in terms of the dynamics that you want the consolidation to do. Because I don't think the world is well served by having like the Snowflake stack, the Databricks stack, and like having these like siloed things where if you build, like you kind of said it to yourself, Scott, like they acquire like the 4th or 5th place tool, which isn't as good as the best tool, and you can't do best of breed anymore. I think the kind of feel you want is more like, you kind of want like the iOS for data platforms, where there's this surface that provides constraints and ways that things can interoperate. But then there's still a lot of heterogeneity in the application space.
Totally.
So you have lots of players. And so what this takes is a coherent, horizontal layer that people can plug into, as opposed to pure vertical integration. And so that's really not to like, I'm going to pivot back to talking about my startup, obviously, but that there's many different kind of, I think, theses around what will be this kind of cross-cutting layer. Because I don't know if you need less boxes in Matt Turk's diagram. I think you need it in a coherent framework. Yeah. Both conceptually and in terms of software, where we can make sense of the world. Because I think it's this kind of like, it's this level of like chaos that everyone feels like it's out of control. So I think it was not to mash up every piece of data content that's been written in the last year, but like Ben Stansel had a piece on like a data OS. And I think he posited that DBT could be that layer. I think DBT can be a big part of that, but I think there is a world in data processing outside of data warehouse and SQL statements.
Yeah.
So I think DBT can do, I think what they're doing on the metric side of things makes a ton of sense. But so yeah, that's I just like don't want to live in a world where there's like a Snowflake stack and a Databricks stack, and then like people have to choose one or the other for their career, and like that just doesn't feel great to me. It's kind of like going back to like there's like the Microsoft stack and the Oracle stack.
But they're still here. They're around.
Or even worse, the world of Linux, where you have like a bajillion flavors of that, right? Too. But yeah, point taken. It's interesting you mentioned, sort of the your comment on DBT. It's something Matt and I have been talking a lot about too, where like we're increasingly of the opinion the data stack actually needs to live more at the application layer, or at least like the next gen modern data stack. Data warehousing is great, but that kind of fights yesterday's battles. I think, in our opinion, we would, if you can couple things closer to the application, then it solves a lot of problems. For one, we know this over and over. Metrics, for example, the metrics layer I think exists in absolutely the wrong spot. The data warehouse is great; it solves that problem. It really does need to exist at the application layer or wherever the data is first generated. It also solves the problem, incidentally, of master data management, whatever the hell that is these days. But yeah, I mean, especially with the rise of data apps and whatnot, I think there's actually a fundamental rethink going on right now. With I think, at least from our perspective, what we're seeing is a next gen data stack happening before our very eyes. While everyone's focused on like the modern data stack, which in our opinion is maybe it's kind of mid-century modern data stack, maybe, but there's something else happening right now.
It seems like it. Yeah. And the other thing I'll bring up here, and this is almost more of a business conversation and a financial conversation than a data one in a pure sense. And that is that what we're seeing is just, I'll call it startup speciation. So someone has an idea at one startup, or they're at Google and they can get money and they run off and start a startup. And that's part of what's driving all these data tools. That's fantastic, right? Like this unbundling is awesome for data users because there's so much great activity going on. The question is, does that stop at some point? Does the funding slow down? Do all these small companies get bought up because they're not getting new rounds of funding? Sorry, this is probably making you uncomfortable, well, Nick. Startup founders to talk.
We do have
no, it's fine.
Okay. You guys are gonna be one of the winners. Here's Schrock. Yeah,
exactly.
Like, you're talking about
thinking about all the companies I get to acquire later. This is great.
See you next one of the smart ones. Actually, there's a kind of related question here. Thoughts on Snowflake's acquisition of Streamlit?
Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's the first of many. You're just like, that's to Joe's point about data applications are kind of that next battleground. Yeah. To the point that just like these companies like Snowflake have so much money and just in value that they can easily buy something for $50-100 million and not feel it.
Well,
and
in this case, it was $800 million.
800, yeah, it's a lot.
That's what is that, 1/70th, 1/80th these days. But yeah, no, it's
1/50th after the same day they announced they went down by 25%.
Yeah, ouch. But it's all of a sudden they do this acquisition and suddenly Streamlit is their kind of data products team, and they buy another company and that's their metadata team, and buy this and it's their orchestration team.
Yeah, I mean, I think the acquisition of Streamlit is very, it's pretty exciting. Like the notion of having kind of that sort of platform embedded directly in the data warehouse is like super cool. So I think if they execute it well, it will be a huge win for customers. And I think it also can like push them into more ML use cases, which is super interesting. So, I think it's a potentially brilliant acquisition by Snowflake.
Agreed. Totally.
Okay, Nick, can I put you on the spot real quick here and ask, do you think there's a scenario in which Dagster integrates more into the application layer, where somehow you guys are defining data that goes all the way down to the application layer, not just like the analytics layer?
Yeah, so it depends on what you, it was actually kind of one of the original theses here in that I, built Dagster so that it kind of made sense to software engineers, so to speak. And one of my theories is that just as like more developers are being expected to do their own ops via DevOps tools, that they should also be and like, you know, you build it, you deploy it is kind of like the Amazon way of doing things, right? I think that the same token, the application developers at some point should be responsible for the analytics, or at least like structuring the data so that it can be used in analytical context. Because, you know, if a good product developer is doing their job, they should understand how the product's instrumented, how what their code does, how it affects like the actual user behavior, how that gets surfaced in the internal tooling. So I think this entire discussion is pretty interesting about, because, you know, the way that I define the data platform is what you do with the data once it's like ripped from its original context. You know, that's its like current definition, right? You're like,
Right.
but think about it.
You
Like,
heard it here.
you're taking like the data, and it used to be like surrounded by all the software that manages it, right? And then you're just like literally pressing a button in ingest tool and copying it. And then it's completely unprotected and divorced from the original business logic. And effectively, it's the job of an analytics team to almost like reconstruct a lot of that business logic in a way. And then also there's the problem of like the upstream application teams can break you whenever they want. So I've been kind of going around and around, but I think it makes a lot of sense at a minimum for the applications teams to be much more analytics cognizant. Yeah, and a basic thing, I heard Abi from Flexport talk about this, the head of data at Flexport, and he called it this outbox, how when application developers make a change, they should be updating like schema in the application code that encodes what data is being like going outbound from the application source. And that way, the moment they change it, they know they're going to break the analytics team. And so having an expression of the metadata on both sides of the house, so to speak, is like, I think a very positive next step to that front. But I think there should be like at minimum awareness between the two of them.
Yeah, that's something Matt and I have been riffing on too. We kind of call it the definitions layer, where at each stage where data is mutated or changed, schema definitions otherwise, like there's a semantic, a schema, and a metrics layer. So even at the application point, it's like all metrics are defined by the application team first. Then you have a central source of truth, or somebody defines them, right? But then as changes happen progressively, because you have data lineage, but you don't really have like definitional lineage at this point, which is a very interesting thing. So I don't really give a shit what happened. You know, the data is one thing. It's like, yeah, that's that piece of data that was over here. But to your point as well, it's like, well, that's great. What changed? What happened to it? I don't know. So, but that's the thing that plagues data teams. I mean, you know, it's the trite stat that data scientists spend 80% of the time getting munging data and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that really sucks. And maybe we should focus on fixing that one. But, you know, because I used to be like a lean process junkie back in a former life. So like, I just see things like this. It makes my eyes bleed. I'm like, why are you treating everything like at the very end?
We've already made a lot of strides. Like think about the Hadoop days. What was Hadoop originally designed to do? Well, log processing, right? Because the assumption was that these applications were feeding you total garbage in their logs and you had to like make sense of it. There was no assumption that they were going to feed you good quality data. And we've, at least now, we're mostly to the point where you assume that you're going to get these web events in maybe a nice JSON format or something like this that you can handle. And I think, Joe, you've talked a lot about this too, where in the streaming world, it becomes very hard to fix data issues downstream of the application. And so you need to think about that process much, much earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to people who have designed a lot of the, kind of the fast databases we use now, like Druid and others like that. And I ask them, what do you think about data modeling? They're like, oh, just don't even bother with streaming data. Just assume it's correct at the applications level. And it's like, all right, that's cool. I'll do that. So it's an interesting assumption to make.
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't know, we're very much in a batch kind of way of thinking right now. So I don't even think I think you touched on a couple points, which is essentially pushing up accountability upstream to data quality and streaming, which are two concepts that are just so different and new to the folks currently working in data. And just like, they're not bad concepts. They're actually, in fact, good concepts.
They're terrible concepts.
Joe, bad ideas. They're good concepts, but I don't think this generation of folks that are just getting into data and modern data stack can even most of them can't even conceptualize kind of to give events and pushing the stuff upstream. And I think it'll happen, but we're talking about both the technology shift and just a paradigm shift on the type of tools, how you approach data. It's like streaming data, streaming analytics, event analytics is a completely different thing.
Yeah, if you don't do it right, you're doing like dumb things faster. Is what happens. So, but
ideally, you figure it out faster.
Yeah, hopefully, right? So, yeah, but yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it kind of where we're talking, that's a ways out. So.
It'd be cool. I mean, I think like right now it's just if anytime someone says they need real time or near real time, we're like, can you do it in your production application? Like we could do it because we could do it we could do it in their kind of data stack, but they're not investing in the tooling, the people, just the budget to get that 5 nines, that uptime, that level. Most companies don't have the reliability of their data stack is directly kind of correlated with their investment in their data stack. I mean, I think there's, I guess, a compounding factor that I don't think the technologies have gotten good enough in the data stack. They're kind of 5 to 10 years less advanced than the kind of the production data technologies. And so it's like, not only do you have to the organizations have to put more money, it's harder. And so it's like, do it upstream. And I do think tools platforms like Firebolt, they're early days, but in 12 to 18 months, there's a lot of these new data product platforms that will make things a lot easier to do this. But right now it's just hard and no one's investing the time and money to do this kind of stuff right. Unless you're at a large company, you're at Facebook, Airbnb, one of those companies that are kind of always pushing the envelope.
Scott, I have a question. When you ask your clients, what real time, when you say, I imagine you're in a meeting and the client says, I want real time data. And you say, okay, can you define what you mean by real time? What do they actually want usually?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what I do because, everybody wants everything as fast as they can get it. Like there is, 100% having data instant and like nanosecond, millisecond real time is definitely better for every single organization than 5 minutes, which is better than 15 minutes, which is better than an hour. But the question is like, how much better? And so it's like, you're not asking exactly what real time means. It's like, what is that point where the effort and the value is worth it? And because they'll always want as soon as you can have it. And typically in a typical organization, every 15 minutes is probably as kind of fresh as I've seen it, maybe every 10 minutes. But most organizations we work with is every 1 to 4 hours. And they don't call that real time. They just call it like ongoing updating.
It's a slippery term though, right? I mean, for the audience, Scott and Matt and I, we run very similar companies, different, but I think we deal with like a lot of the same types of problems. So when we get asked about real time, I mean, we've had people, it varies a lot. I mean, we had somebody say that it was once
yesterday.
a month.
What was the client discussion, Joe?
Yeah, exactly.
It was like I don't want to have to wait several months to come up with a new report. I want to get it within a day or a week or something.
Yeah, for some people, like real time means like once a day or whatever. So it totally varies. And then when I would always ask people, well, so if you get the data quicker, like what action are you going to take that's different from what you're doing now? It's always my litmus test. Like what changes, right? So if you could theoretically get data every picosecond, for example, what would you do with that? Right. And so when it reaches an extreme where then I start asking, okay, so at a certain point, are you doing analysis or are you trying to drive a behavior? And if you're trying to drive a behavior and action, why don't you try and automate that? Like, why do you have to use a report? Right. So if you need data that quickly, that's not something a human can process. And so it's really that continuum of, are you trying to do analysis? Are you trying to take an immediate action? Like, so what does that look like? And then, from there, it's sort of the spectrum of, of actions that you could possibly take. up to and including just automating stuff, which Scott would love because he likes automating things. So,
but I mean, wouldn't you say, like, I agree with that, and I have that exact same conversation, but I feel like every organization, unless they indulge in bad habits like watching the pot boil, every organization would theoretically benefit from having as real-time data as possible. I mean, I agree if there's something they're trying to trigger, they should automate that. But like every organization will benefit as much as possible for knowing as accurately possible what is the state currently when they want to ask a specific question. And I think it's all about teasing. It's just like how current does it have to be for you to be able to make that right decision? Is 15 minutes, and like if it's ongoing, automated, but just knowing the current snapshot of what's going on the ground is always helpful, but you have to make sure people don't indulge in bad habits.
Yeah, I remember there's a local company here that has a data analytics tool, and this is in Salt Lake, and they had this billboard that says binge watch your data, and I was like, if you have to binge watch your business or something, I was like, if you have to binge watch your business like every second, like your business probably sucks actually. So like that, to me, that you should start automating that. Like, why do you have to pay that much attention to a chart? So it's weird.
I mean, I feel like one of the things I've been excited to see take off that hasn't taken off is just this automated analytics, like the outlier, anodot, those things. Like, I'm surprised that no one's cracked this so far, because I do think there is a lot of pot watching and people putting rules or triggers or something like that to understand anomalous conditions or changes or what. And there's a lot of people that spend the first 30 minutes of their day looking over the same dashboard to see if anything changed. Why do you think that hasn't been automated yet? It is hard for a single organization to do unless they're quite large, but it actually feels like fairly doable for a SaaS company to automate.
How would you define? What would be your precise definition of automated analytics? Like what? It's just like
there you go, asking me to be more specific and have clear
Nick,
thoughts.
Such a contrarian.
I mean, it's like it's triggering on what sales went down. What was it? And I'm going to go back to my mattress days. It's like, was it mattresses or sheets or queens or like was the conversion rate on this? And just there's like a lot of people that just have they have the data, they have all the dashboards, and they literally have the combination of charts that they can triangulate in what probably happened, but it's just like, why? That feels like a computer problem.
Right. Yeah. Have you ever had clients that use Sisu data?
No, but
Sisu data, like that, I've never used it in Anger, or even I got a demo of it, but when I heard it described at a high level, this sort of like automatic detection of correlations in your data warehouse and surfacing like interesting things, that sounded like an approach that is sufficiently general enough that it could be like interesting on this matter. But
I mean, why hasn't it clicked? Like, why hasn't Sisu? Why doesn't everybody have it? Or why hasn't Looker added it? Why hasn't Tableau added it? It just feels like, it feels something that's immensely useful.
I would say part of it is that there's a cultural problem. So, for example, like these ads platforms, right? For the most part, you're going to have a hard time beating Google Ads automation for advertising for you. There are certainly cases where you can, especially if you have a very sophisticated data science team. But so many times, people just don't want to let go of the wheel. They're like, no, I need to tune this bid manually. So, like the data is all there, the automation is there, and they just can't quite let it go. And so, I don't know. I mean, this is a bigger human cultural problem in the future. So, self-driving is still controversial right now. I think self-driving cars will eventually be very good. Will we be able to let go of the wheel and just say, you know what, I as a human are going to focus on other things besides driving all the time, or I'm going to let this part of my life be automated, or my business. And then there's the technology aspect and getting the technology out there. But yeah, I think the culture part is a huge slice.
Well, I remember the other day, who was it? Ryan from ThatDot. It's a new startup, but he created this software package called Quine, which is I guess it came out of DARPA of all places. But what it is like a streaming graph technology, and so what it does anomaly detection using a graph on data streams. And on the surface, I was like, okay, this sounds pretty dang cool. solves a lot of problems. You can do anomaly detection, for example, and streams of data and pick out, you know, like bad actors or something like that. But I think it's kind of the general case of a lot of these, you know, we'll take anomaly detection, for example. Like, I think there's no shortage of companies doing this. In fact, every data app database you talk to, like, yeah, one of the things we want to do is predict fraud, for example, or some sort of anomalous behavior with streams. And then I think maybe part of it is messaging or something. I don't know, because then it's like, well, why don't I just use like the tools that already do monitoring, for example, instead of this BI tool or this new data tool. And so I think part of it might be marketing, because I do agree, like this, if you can take the humans out of the loop on this stuff, like why not? Like this is like the perfect case for automation if there ever was one, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I don't know. It's a good question.
We'll ask Nick. I mean, do you think Dagster fits into this? Presumably, as an orchestration platform, you can also be right in the middle of automation.
Yeah, I mean, insofar as yeah, like an anomaly detection system has to plug into orchestration and do computations on a regularized basis, but certainly not something on our near-term radar.
Makes sense.
But you could kick it off, this kind of anomaly detection to run as soon as
yeah, totally.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's really interesting.
And it just, everything feels, I think my theme of the day is everything relies too much on people at the moment. We need we're so close, I think, to just having a lot of really cool, having the people focus on the logic and the business logic and the context and the things that are uniquely hard for machines to do, and letting kind of machines run, whether it's DevOps or kind of at least level 1 observations of data.
Interesting. I was writing about this morning, actually. I was writing the final chapter of our book, and it's about the future of data engineering. And one of the things I was writing about was how, you know, data engineering, I suspect, is going to get a lot more enterprisey, i.e., as tools become simpler, as things become automated for data engineers, they'll simply just move up the value chain and focus on next order problems, right? Things like governance, you know, and kind of data management related stuff, things that were traditionally actually very, you know, kind of blue shirt and khaki sort of tasks that were done at, you know, kind of more stodgy companies. But now this stuff's been democratized. Governance is like a pretty cool word these days, which I never thought I would see ever. So, you know, data management, that's another one where I see that as a field that's going to see a renaissance very, very soon. Precisely because, you know, I think people are trying to write off the death of, you know, like data engineers. Oh, that field's done. Like, what's left after you've done Fivetran to Snowflake? And I'm like, I think you're missing the bigger picture here. There's a lot of other things to be done, right?
There's
like,
a lot of stuff to do.
Oh Lord, yeah, right. And that, we're just in the data space. We're not even talking about ML. You know, you know,
right.
I crossed the chasm, you know, on the other side with the ML ops community. We're all homies, and there's a different parallel universe going on there right now. You know, and then I talk to software engineers, and they're fascinated about data. So what I see happening is there's going to be a convergence, you know, app, ML, data over the next decade, and I think that's going to be very fascinating to watch unfold, because I can't say that like the modern, you know, whatever we're doing today is like the final call. Like, I think we're just getting started. I've been in data long enough to see it too.
This data ML bridging is really a place where actually I'm really excited about what is going on in Dagster land, because we kind of divide our customers into a couple of personas. And so one is what I'll call the modern data stack platform engineer. So like I'm an engineer and my job is to like bring in these different tools that have been set up and like cohere it into a platform. But the other interesting set of users we have are what I'll call the ML engineer, the MLEs or ML platform engineers. And they also gravitate towards the system. And then actually we have some users where they're crossing that boundary a bit, right? So I'm the modern data stack platform engineer. I have like got my data engineering team spun up, but now my mandate's expanding to also support an experimentation platform. And they can use the same set of tooling to kind of cross both. Because in the end, you call it ETL on one side of the house, you can call it feature engineering on the other side of the house. It's approximately the same process. You're doing computation and data processing to produce intermediate artifacts that are used downstream for other things, right? And you know, we imagine a world where like the ML people can cross and use dbt to like change the data warehouse and then pull data out of that to do ML modeling and like kind of do it in all one surface. And yeah, and where we kind of see ourselves playing in this space, to kind of expand on the previous question, is like we want to be like the system of record where all your assets are defined in software. So like attaching like metadata and information on those, like that canonical representation of the data asset. Like you could like attach like, hey, this rule about like, this is like, this is what we consider an anomaly, and basically like, and that can be code, and you can like effectively like, attach it to that software definition. But yeah, no, and I think that we see this data ML kind of boundary fuzzing, which I think is actually really positive.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, because it's kind of a distinction without a difference in some ways, right? Like, yeah, ML engineers are probably also managing GPU clusters or something, but I think right now what we see is a lot of repeated wasted labor where the data engineering or even data warehouse side of the house is doing stuff that then the ML engineers kind of repeat in their pipelines.
I got into data engineering from ML engineering.
Yeah,
I was building ML engineering systems back in the early 2010s, and that's how I got into data engineering. So like the hard part was the engineering, which did not exist back then. You had to build everything. So that was, and in my mind, having done both, it's kind of, I don't really see that much of a difference, honestly. They're titles, but it's like back in the day, you were just called software engineer. That wasn't even an ML or a data engineer. It was just your software engineer. So, it's, to me, it's almost a false dichotomy in some ways. But then looping it all back to the application too, where I think you're going to be more tightly bound to that. That's where I think it's going to get very, very interesting. So who knows?
I mean, it's very interesting. I feel like most of the organizations I've worked with that have had a strong ML function, and not like, exploratory research ML, but like production ML, it's a completely different team, rolls up to a completely different part of the organization. Like, how do we bridge that? I every single time I'm like, why aren't these on the same teams? And the answers I get are, different stacks, and then there's not like there aren't experienced data leaders that can run, that have experience in both areas. Or there are some, but they're not many. That you either come up the ML track or you come up the data engineering kind of now analytics engineering track. But it's only if you're at very, very large organizations that have like a chief data officer, chief algorithms officer that really kind of rolls up a big part of the ecosystem. These are typically two very different teams that roll up to different parts of the organizations that are very separate. Like how do we solve that?
Yeah, I think it will be solved not by merging those teams, but I think the better model is to deploy like data engineers and ML engineers like closer to their business function. And kind of have that capability spread across the org, and then common like platform and services teams that ensure that those people are more efficient and productive. That's like the other way. You can think of it like merging those two orgs, or you can think about like actually the entire notion of having like an ML tree is wrong, and you should have like an ML platform team, but then the machine learning people are spread across the company, kind of closer to the business units that they serve.
And I'll kind of give orchestration a shout out here again and say that I see orchestration platforms as they should be a collaboration layer, right? So instead of me as an engineer just consuming someone else's table, I should basically consume their DAG. In other words, I should look at their tasks and say, actually, I want to piggyback off of this stage of their data before it becomes final, because then it hasn't been aggregated yet, and I can get what I need without having to repeat all that work.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Looks like we're coming up on time. I think we also wanted to give a shout out as well to what's happening kind of globally right now. I think we're Nick, Scott, and I were kind of talking offline, and Matt as well. It's I think we're definitely privileged to be being able to talk about data right now. Well, there's a lot of chaos, and really bad things happening in the world. So just. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that, but
I was just like, just sending thoughts and positive energy out to the world, and honestly, if I can help anybody and reach out to me, my email is scott@brooklyndata.co. If I can be helpful in kind of grand scale of life events or kind of smaller individual life events, don't hesitate to reach out.
I think it's always a good reminder to put all your problems into perspective. That we all think our lives are stressful and we have our trials and tribulations, but this is a reminder that we should always be thankful for what we have.
100%.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think running a business is a very narcissistic process. And probably, Joe's my business partner, so we can talk about this very directly. But it's like you're running this business, you have health insurance costs, you have employees, you have clients, you're all stressed out. But then you step back and you're like, what's the worst that happens? Oh, well, I stop being in business and I probably just go find another job. Like it's, and yeah, when you start to think about stuff other people are going through, it's a very different perspective on what life is about.
A lot of people have had their lives completely upended in like the last week. You know how much that would suck for any of us here? A lot. So yeah. So great talk. Thanks to the audience for the questions. I'm sorry things didn't work on LinkedIn. I'm trying to work with StreamYard to diagnose this, but there's a chance I'm going to have to find another platform provider of choice if this doesn't work. So
Matt just has to talk about Azure more, and then you're going to be good. That's the issue.
That's a good point.
They heard a lot of mention about GCP. They're like, cut these guys off.
Snowflake, like, no, we can't have this. Synaptic. I'll say more about Synaptic.
Oh boy. Cool. Well, anyway, we'll see you guys. And also on the Monday morning data chat, we have Fabiana Clement out of Portugal. She's with Y Data. We're going to talk about synthetic data. So if synthetic data is your jam, come check it out. She knows a lot about this topic. So thanks. Have a great weekend. We'll see you all next week.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Folks.
All right.